This episode is going to make you think about almost every piece of research and every experiment you've heard of in a different way. So after recent crises in academia regarding the repeatability of results, data tampering, p-hacking, and other statistical shenanigans, questions about the reliability of our mathematical tools have come up, and there's plenty of problems out there, but few are offering solutions. Except us. We're offering solutions. Today, we thought we'd talk about a particular problem in statistical testing and the method developed to try and address it. Now, I know I've made a big claim at the beginning of this, but what we're talking about is comparisons. How do we pick the right groups to compare? And should we be as confident as we are when we find quote unquote statistically significant results? Hello, and welcome to Of Significance, the podcast where supply curves slope upward, demand curves slope downward, and the vibe curve slips just right. I'm your everyman host, Brent Buckwright here, with two data experts who knew about big data before it got big, Dr. Nathan Woods and Dr. Steve Bronars. And we are joined today by the co-author of Steve's most recent working paper exploring a particular statistical problem, Carol Ma. Carol is a consultant at Edgeworth specializing in the statistical analyses of labor and employment issues. She has provided rigorous statistical analysis and litigation support on a wide range of wage and hour topics, as well as claims of race, age, and gender discrimination in employment decisions. Carol, welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Let's also, hey, Steve. Hey, Nathan.
Hey, Brent. How you doing?
Also, thank you for having me.
It's good. Yeah, good. Okay. So I want to understand, you guys have a particular solution to a particular problem, and I feel like I'm using the word particular a lot, but can you give me an example of where this problem that you guys are trying to look at might come up? What kind of companies might face this, or what kind of analyses is this going to be an issue?
The most prevalent, I think, type of case would be when there are layoffs, or sometimes we call them reductions in force, and there are groups of people who are at risk of that, and some get selected, which is not going to be a great thing here because you get selected to be laid off, and others keep their jobs. And so what the tests that are being conducted are, is there a significant difference in the rate at which younger versus older workers were selected for the layoff, sometimes after controlling for other factors, sometimes just overall. And the key difference here in these age case like this, where you're comparing the two groups, the benchmark group and the age protected group, there's some ambiguity as to where the age cutoff would be that would divide you between the younger workers and the older workers. All we know from the Age, Discrimination, and Employment Act is that you only get age protected when you're age 40 or above. So the cutoff between younger and older could be age 40, or it could be age 50, or it could be age 45, or it could be any age between the two. And so often you'll see multiple tests being run that are basically looking at the same question. Was there a difference in the treatment of these two groups that we'll just call it like the younger group and then the older group, with a changing definition of what does it mean to be younger or older depending on the age cutoff that you use.
So as I understand it, in a RIF, a reduction in force analysis, age as an issue in discrimination comes up a lot in particular. Is there any particular reason why that is?
Older workers are oftentimes the more expensive. The allegation would be that you're trying to lay off the older, more experienced workers for that reason. A defense would be that those workers are the ones that have been trained a longer period of time since they underwent their training, and maybe their skills are not as relevant to today's workforce as it was, when they initially got hired.
I think in the law itself, it's not limited to reductions in force or layoffs or anything like that. It would cover hiring. It would cover promotions, assignments, pay. And so if there was a disparity in any of those things, but I think that probably the conventional wisdom would be that the longer you've been at an employer, which is, going to be correlated with age, but not necessarily moving in lockstep with it, maybe the more difficult it would be to find another job that was comparable to the one that you'd spent a number of years with. And so that might be a reason why there's more attention that's paid to that. in addition to what Nathan was saying, but I'd say that that's probably one of the more common types of lawsuits under the ADEA. But there are also hiring cases and other cases. I think probably the RIF example is the best one for what we're going to talk about here.
So the Age Discrimination and Employment Act says over 40 versus under 40. You can't discriminate in your employment practices. Is the test then just pick 40 and look at over versus under? Or you can just pick any age over 40 and look at under?
I would say that the only thing that the Act says is that the age cutoff has to be at least 40, but you could try other ages. And so when the dilemma that we're going to talk about occurs is when if I tested age 40 or above versus under 40, there was not a significant difference in, let's say, the selection rates for being laid off. But if I looked above 50 and below 50, maybe I did see a significant difference. And then how do you interpret that? Because you have two tests. They're not independent of each other because you're running it on the same data set, and anybody who was above 50 was also above 40. So you have that.
Hold on, let me check the math on that.
It's a state of mind thing.
Right. Yeah.
And so
I'm honestly, calling 40 as old to me is like, ooh, I'm getting close.
Yeah.
I know you guys are over the...
Right. You're a young man.
Yeah.
So all those things make it that it's not as if these are completely unrelated results, but you can often see, depending on the cutoff you use, you could reach a different conclusion if that was the only thing you looked at. If I only saw that one result, you might be tempted to conclude one thing. If you only saw the other, and then when you see them both, the question is, well, now what do I think about it? And so that's where Carol and I started working on this and have come up with kind of a solution to that.
Yeah, and another consideration for the cutoff from the plaintiff's perspective might be the named plaintiff's actual age. So they might be thinking, I want to bring this lawsuit. I'm above 40, but I'm also above 50. I'm even above 55. So I want to kind of find the people that are kind of in the same situation as me. So it would be a cutoff that makes the most sense to them, which will involve probably picking a few different ways. As long as it's above 40 and below their actual age, then it could be a potential option.
So if I was the plaintiff side, couldn't I just pick every age, and then when I found a statistically significant difference, I could just pick that and then make the allegation on that age?
Age is a real number.
Yes.
You can't pick every possible age.
Well, yeah, sure. You can't pick, now.
Every integer age. Okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Is 40 and a half is over 40. Can I pick that?
Yeah. We grew up celebrating half birthdays. So I'm saying you could do that too.
Did you count into
leap year?
Yeah, leap days?
Right. No, there's
but that's a great question. That's the question that you guys should be answering.
We did answer that question. I think in a lot of the examples, for whatever reason, even though it doesn't make a difference, we focused on the every 5 year kind of.
Because we have 5 fingers on each hand, or
I don't know why. Because we all work in base 5.
Yeah.
Well, math joke there.
It was based on the review and resubmit that you got. They said that you've given us too many years. Right. Just give us every 5.
I think we've looked at it when you have every integer value, and you have maybe pick 20 different cutoffs that you could do. And I think, Carol, one of the things there, we're thinking about, and when we wrote this up, having a kind of standard data set that we were using to do this, where you had 100 employees and you're selecting some of them. And so there might be some ages, 47 or something, where nobody in your data was exactly that age. And in which case, it looks like 46 is a different cutoff than 47, but it really isn't, because nobody was 47. So that doesn't really matter. And so you have that issue. But if you had enough employees, you could pick a lot of different age cutoffs, a lot of employees who were subject to the potential RIF. I think we never considered anything more than each year. And then we run into that issue where, sometimes even that is a little more than you would need, because there's some ages that nobody turned out to be exactly that age.
So naive view, I would just look at the percentage of people who are riffed and a certain age versus people under that age and were riffed. What's the test that we're actually running here?
So the test that we usually run is called the Fisher's exact test. It is based on an exact hypergeometric distribution, and it assumes that there is a fixed number of people being selected in every time, and that will basically mimic the selection process in many of these reductions in force selections, where the companies are trying to pick a certain number or percentage of their workforce to be laid off. And we're just following the same assumption and assume that the process of selection is independent or age neutral. And the best way to test this is the Fisher's exact, which also works if you have a smaller sample size, like only 5 or 10 people being laid off.
Yeah, if you had a large enough data set with a large enough number of selections in particular, not just in the number of people that are at risk, then you could also use a chi-square test, which is kind of based on a binomial process, and it's going to, with a large enough number of selections, mimic a bell-shaped curve and all that kind of stuff that we love. But the issue is that if the sample sizes are small, that might not be a very good approximation. So Fisher came up with this long time ago and said, hey, in these situations, we can use this exact test. And as Carol said, one of the key other things about it is that you're always, if the choice is, hey, we've got 100 employees at risk, and we're going to select 10% of them, we're going to select 10 of them, it would always be 10. And once you
right, because you don't need
10,
you don't need to just pick 12. It's 10. You don't need to pick 30. It's just 10.
Just 10. Because if you said, hey, there's everybody has a 10% chance of being selected, you could sometimes pick 11, 12, 15, or only 5 if you got lucky or unlucky, depending on how you're looking at it. And you wouldn't always end up with the target number of reductions in force. You would kind of leave that up to chance. So the model, the kind of prototypical model here is everybody's equally at risk, everybody's equally qualified. We're going to leave it up to random chance who gets selected. But we know how many people we're going to say you have to go because there's not enough work to go around, or there's whatever the reason for the downsizing is. But you're not going to leave the number of people being selected up to random chance.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got a specific kind of test. I don't understand what the problem is though, because
you want to run that at every single age.
I'll just run it at every single age.
That's what you said.
Yeah.
Brent wants to run it at every age.
What am I doing wrong?
What's wrong with that?
Because isn't there a statistically significant difference? I mean, I found one, right? At some age, there's some cutoff where the people over that age look like they are being terminated at rates higher than people under that age.
I've never seen that before, but yeah, I could imagine.
Some kind of mythical creature I've never seen before.
The idea is, and it goes back a long way in statistics, is that if I look in enough places for a significant difference, let's say I run a regression model and I have a bunch of different controls in the model, just due to random chance, one of them may look significant. Because the way we do these significance tests is we're willing to make errors where we, even when there is no effect, if we see a big enough difference between actual and expected, we say there was an effect there. So if you're using kind of a 5% significance level, the theory is if they were independent, which they aren't here, so we'll explain that in a minute. The theory would be, hey, if I check for 20 different things, just due to random chance, I'm going to find one. So I had 20 different age cutoffs. You might think, well, one of them, just due to luck, could be significant at the 5% level, because that's what it means, is that you would, even under a null hypothesis that was true and there really was no effect, 5% of the time you would see a result enough in the tails to conclude that. So you'd be over rejecting the age neutrality process if you just treated each test on its own and looked at the results at face value.
This is like that XKCD comic where they're testing,
Yes.
Two scientists are testing jelly beans and whether they cause cancer. It's like, do jelly beans cause cancer? No. Blue? No. Red? No. Purple? No. Popcorn? No. Green? Yes.
Yes.
Oh, so then we'll publish a paper on green jelly beans cause cancer.
Right. And if you're not doing, randomized controlled trials, and if you don't set up your hypothesis testing, using the scientific method and all that, you just are searching for results. It's another kind of p-hacking, and like, hey, we didn't know it until we saw it, but age 52, that's the cutoff where the discrimination occurs. And how did we figure that out? We didn't look, and till we looked at the data, we didn't know that. So that's what you want to protect against. But if they're not really all independent, as I think Carol's going to explain.
Yeah, I think just by looking for using multiple different tests and doing it on the same data, and only reporting the one that's most significant, it runs into the potential of over-rejecting, as Steve said, just based on a random significant result. And what that leads to, what the problem is really that the p-value, which we usually rely on to determine whether the test is significant or not, is not really a reliable measure for what's the percentage or what's the likelihood of seeing a false positive result. So what we are trying to do is to provide a different measure and adjusted measure for the p-value, which will better reflect how likely a certain test can be a false positive.
So is this like a problem of just being able to make comparisons, that I've got to pick one group and versus the other when I'm doing a statistical test, and I could pick my cutoff? At age, it's a little bit easier to think about than maybe gender or race or some of the other characteristics that you might be testing. But because you're able to make so many different thresholds to find this problem, that's why you're able to come up with a more than 20% chance of it being due to random chance.
Yeah, I think there are two things here. One is, if you selectively report it, that's being a little maybe dishonest, because you should say, hey, I tried a bunch of different things and here's what I got. But the other issue is, even if you're upfront and say, well, I tried 20 different things. I tried the 20 different jelly beans. And it was only when I got to the green one that I saw this correlation that I'm going to now label in some way. The point is, maybe that was really true. And so you want to have a methodology that says, I know you're going to be doing multiple tests. And I want to say, when you see the most significant effect in your example of a jelly bean, how significant of a difference does that have to be for me to say, okay, that was enough? Because you didn't pick it until after you saw the range of outcomes and you go, that was where we saw the biggest disparity. That's what we're going to focus on. If you had done 20 different things and you go, let's just pick one at random, then that'd be okay, because you didn't kind of
cherry pick which one.
I just want to quickly plug theory. I feel like I'm always, where's the theory? I mean, that's the thing, right? There is no underlying theory that caused you ran everything you could possibly run, and then you picked the one that looks the way you wanted it to look in terms of publishing your paper or finding the result in a report or whatever. That's all kind of, not consistent with the scientific method, not consistent with our theoretical approach and what our expectations are, and developing hypothesis and all the rest, right?
And we talked about this a bit, Carol, as we were working on this. Like, you make the allegation that the older workers were treated differently than the younger ones in the complaint, but it's not a very precise hypothesis to test based on that. That kind of opens up the door to, there could be a lot of different potential cutoffs. And so I think that's the one thing about the ADEA in these cases. It kind of invites that sort of thing. Even if you have a theory of why the older workers were treated differently, it's, there's not a theory that why it had to be above age 52 or 47.
There's not a theory of what it means to be old, as Brent was just talking about. Yeah.
Changing that. Yeah. So I think I'm right on that. It's really coming down to the fact that you've done multiple of these, and then you're going to focus on a particular one, presumably the one where you see the biggest disparity, and go like, okay, there seems to be something to look into here.
So I want to get into your actual paper and what the proposed solution is. And we've already mentioned hypergeometric, binomial, Bell distribution. Obviously, our intelligent listeners know all these things. They understand them. We don't need to go into details about that kind of stuff. But pretend, if you have to, that I'm an idiot. Can you walk me through what exactly your correction is to this problem?
Okay, I'm going to have Carol pick up on that. But before she gets to that, this is a problem that's been around a while.
20 years.
More than 20 years.
30?
It's more than 30.
Oh my
It's been around for many decades. And
we were all not age protected when this first came around.
And so there was a statistician, Bonferroni, don't ask me to spell that, that came up with one of the first solutions to this problem. And I think it applied more to your jelly bean problem, where you're just like, hey, let's try a bunch of different things. They're not really related to each other in the sense that if I had that popcorn, which is an interesting color for a jelly bean, it doesn't tell me anything about whether I would get the green. Whereas if I know if I'm above 50, I know I'm above 40.
Yeah.
And so there's that interdependence. It's the same data set, as Carol's saying. So the kind of classical, original, and then there have been many extensions of that approach for correction, as Carol was saying, we want to correct the p-value, we want to correct the threshold. How big does the difference have to be before we say it's significant? That correction was too much, and you'd end up under rejecting.
Bonferroni's.
Yeah, he was always aggressively.
For reasons not really worth going into, other than he was thinking about a problem where things were more independent of each other, whereas obviously in these age cutoffs, they're very related to each other.
Was that the only correction that existed before, or Bonferroni was the guy for making corrections?
Yeah, so Bonferroni is the beginning of a series of techniques that are all grouped under this term called family-wise error rate adjustments. And
so catchy.
All of these approach, they are trying to control or make sure that the most significant result out of all the results that you find is within the threshold that you would expect. So they tend to be more conservative and sometimes, like Steve said, overly strict. So then that will cause the researchers to miss out on some significant or actual results. And the alternative, another second way to, sometimes in these biomedical studies, the researchers are less worried about the most significant result, but they are trying to make sure that the proportion of type 1 errors is within a certain threshold. And that's the second type of techniques that's called false discovery rate procedures. Those were mostly proposed in the late 1990s, also a while ago, but
it's good years.
Those are also, like, if we try those methodologies, there are two challenges associated specifically with our intention here. One is that the results really vary based on the distribution of the sample that you're looking at. So sometimes it can do much better if for certain samples of age distribution, but for others it will give you a stricter or less strict result. And the other issue is also that given that our tests are highly dependent of each other, since if you're above 50, you're also above 40, the adjustment will still overcorrect. The false discovery adjustments will still overcorrect for the p-values that we're looking at.
So we've got these prior corrections. They've got problems with overcorrecting, which we don't want to do because there might be actually statistically significant results that are meaningful. These ham bones have just thrown out a bunch of ideas that just aren't working. But we here at Edgeworth we've got the stuff that works. Obviously, those people were doing specific things that are related to the fields that they were looking at. But so I'm not really throwing them under the bus, but I'm kind of throwing them under the bus. So how are we correcting better?
Ham bones are delicious.
Yeah. Oh, we love a ham bone. Ham bone, positive.
The procedure that we advocate using is very tailored to this problem that we have, where you've got a finite number of people that are at risk of a layoff. You've got different possible age cutoffs. You know that there's overlap in the age cutoffs. As we've been saying all along here, if you're above 50, you also would be above 40. If you're above 55, you're also above 50. So they're not strictly independent. And so come up with a method that works for that particular problem. And as Carol said, it's very context specific because it really depends on the distribution of ages. There's some companies where almost all the people at risk of a layoff were above age 40, and other companies where very few of them at risk of a layoff could be above age 40. And so how the tests work, the different Fisher exact tests work, and how the corrections work has to be tailored to the specifics of the problem, but you can do it all in kind of the same way as we laid out in the paper.
Lay it on me. I want to know what this is.
How do we do this, Carol?
Yeah.
In 30 seconds or less.
Yeah.
No, I'm joking.
Can you make it a sound bite that we can use?
You take your time.
Yeah.
So our approach actually invites the idea of like alternative universes. So we are actually creating.
This is going to be good for Marvel fans who love a multiversal type thing. So
we are basically putting in these parameters where we know how many people are at risk and how many selections will be made, and then what the age distributions are. But we randomly assign the people that will be selected. So the selection process is repeated for 10,000 times, and it can be even more. But we just want to create multiple universes or all the possibilities of how the selection will play out, and then we calculate the p-values at different age cutoffs, which should be selected beforehand. In the paper that we worked on, we selected 40, 45, 50, 55, and 60 as cutoffs. And then we do the Fisher exact test on all these 10,000 different samples, different universes, and get the list of different p-values at different cutoffs. So with this information, then we can actually adjust for or find the specific scenario that happened in reality and find out where that situation sits in all the different scenarios.
Because when Carol's talking about the p-value, that's a p-value that just comes out of your statistical software, which assumes you just did this one test in isolation, and it'll tell you, oh, the p-value here is 0.04, which you would think, okay, there's only 4% of the time would I get a number that low. But the question is, that was one of 5 tests you ran. Was that the most significant, the second most significant? And so you order the data in that way, and then you say, well, empirically, in this multiverse world, what was the bottom tail? How low were those p-values in the bottom tail? And, where did that cutoff occur? Because it may be misleading for me to just look at the p-value that comes out of the statistical package that isn't considering this repeated 10,000 scenarios, and I'm only going to look at the one that I think is the most significant until I see it.
This sounds like a Bronar's dream. We just randomly select some number of people to be terminated and then test if there is a difference on a random age cutoff from the set that we've chosen.
Well,
we're doing a natural experiment.
It is really kind of what the plaintiff's expert usually does, is that I'm going to compare the rates of observed selection for a reduction in force relative to what I think the benchmark would be if everybody was selected at random. And that's okay if you're just doing the one test for the one age cutoff. But when you've done 5 different ones and you're showing us the one that you think is the most convincing, we need to do this approach that Carol talked about in order to correct for that.
So you run 10,000 different random applications of terminations. You've got different cutoff points. You do a test on each of those cutoff points in each of your random worlds. You get a p-value from that. How do I summarize that information to say whether it's meaningful relative to what actually happened?
Yeah, so the most important point here is really just to order or rank the p-values that you find in each application, in each of the 10,000 applications. So we're not necessarily always comparing the cutoff of 40 across all those 10,000 scenarios, and we're not only comparing the p-value of 50, but rather we're comparing the lowest p-value for the 10,000 scenarios, and then based on after you sort the most significant p-values, and then we can actually allocate or adjust the p-value into the percentile to this whole to different scenarios, and that will be the alternative or the adjusted result that we'll find.
Yeah, and I think what Carol is saying there is that even which age cutoff shows as the most significant, there is some random chance into to which one. So the most important thing is which looks the most significant. Was it the green one? Was it the orange one? And the jelly beans? And that's the one that was most significant. And then you go through the next, what was the most significant there? And you're looking at how big the disparity was. When we say p-value, I mean like how big was that statistical disparity that generated that p-value that comes out of the statistical package, and rank them and say what is now a most extreme outcome. So
Yeah, so an example I can share is that if we run 40 selections out of 100 employees,
That is 40 terminations.
40 terminations on 100 employees. And we can see that in one of the scenarios of this 10,000 applications, one of them has a most significant p-value of 0.022, which would be considered as significant since it's less than 0.5, which is the normal or usual significance level in these kind of studies. But if we sort all the most significant p-values across all the applications, we can see that the 0.22 actually sits at the 4.7%. So which means that there are actually 4.7% of the times the most significant p-value is less than or equal to that number.
So in other words, that p-value that you got is not nearly as extreme as you thought it was at 0.022.
It's thought it would only happen 2.2% of the time,
and it's looking like it's happening almost
4.7%
right,
of the time,
which is getting perilously close to the 5%.
And you would have picked that number if you had after the fact said, where is the discrepancy in how these 40 layoffs were assigned? Where is that the biggest difference between the age groups? And as Carol said, sometimes it could be between under 50 and above 50 if it's all really random. Sometimes it'd be above or below 45. That's not really the key. The key is this looks the most problematic, and it gave me this p-value, but it's like in this example, way overstating how unlikely it would be to see that due to random chance, because it's actually something that you'd see, more than twice as often as you think if you're, after it's all done, looking for the most significant differential.
So what this is saying is you need to, in the same way that we might have to adjust an R-squared, that you need to adjust the statistical threshold that you're checking things against.
In the sense that as you add factors to a pay model or something, your adjusted R-square is adjusting to reflect the fact that you're using more information.
You can't just overstuff it.
Right.
Except this is better than adjusted R-squared.
Yeah,
now that's the energy I want to hear.
That's what Bone Ferroni said too.
It's an adjustment like that. It's an adjustment. It's kind of like when we cluster or whatever and say, I don't think that these things are really independent of each other, and so we're going to adjust the standard errors and the p-values to account for that. So there are other examples of where you do this adjustment. This adjustment is very much based on simulations that have been tailored to what I think is the null hypothesis in this problem, which is like, hey, we think it should look like it was just done at random. And if not, then we have questions about age discrimination. And it's very dependent on what the actual data looks like for your problem. As Carol said, we talked about if you're going to pick 40 people out of 100, obviously the results would be different if you only pick 20 out of 100. And then it depends on the age distribution of the people who are at risk in terms of how this plays out. So I would say that what we propose is a methodology rather than, oh, here's a simple adjustment factor that you could apply, because it's very...
This is a methodology that would be tailored to the data that you
Yes.
had in each particular case.
So it's
or
not
study.
like in this example, you go, oh, just double the
robust
critical
time,
p-value,
right.
and then
So is this the Bronner's Ma adjustment, or do we?
I think it might be Ma Bronner's.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. So I think I understand this adjustment a little bit. I'm curious, as we kind of wrap up, where there are other areas this might end up being applied.
Well, can I just real quick before we get there, because just to confirm the flip, right? So if you did this thing and you found your your 0.022, and it was actually down there closer to 0.022 or maybe even lower, who knows?
Right.
That would confirm for you that was a real result, right? So that's kind of, you've applied the adjustment to confirm that the thing you're seeing is real, and it's not just a product of this. I ran a whole bunch of stuff and I chose the one I wanted.
The second thing you said, I would agree. It's not just a product of that, but you could still get the most significant result. You have a threshold for that, but we also have a threshold for the second most significant result, right? And so you could still get a mixed bag of results.
Yeah. So our approach can adjust for each and every p-value that we tested. And basically, it's doing the procedure on the most significant p-value again to the second most significant p-value by sorting them and assign the percentile as the p-value to that specific scenario. And you can also do it for the third most significant and so on, so that each p-value in each of the tests will have an adjusted value. And those numbers will actually reflect the actual chances of the type 1 error and being observed as a significant result. So this will also, on the other side, not to overcorrect or over-reject the significance that we probably could see in some of the cases, but not the others.
I love that because it's a one size fits all kind of customizable, but also it'll allow other academics to still keep their 2 asterisks or 3 asterisks or 1 asterisk methodology.
Floating cross.
Or a floating cross,
But you could get a result where you go, it does look significantly different, even with our adjustment at the age 50 cutoff, but not at 45 or 40, and maybe it does also at 55 or whatever. It could turn out based on not those ages in particular, but which ones look the most significant, second most significant, third, right? And so it's still possible that after you do this, you have a mixed set of outcomes. And then it gets back, Nathan, to your point, like, well, what's the theory? Why did we only see this starting at this point? There's really, this is a very empirical approach without a lot of explanation why you look at certain age cutoffs, but not others.
So as we wrap up, I'm curious if you guys can explain some areas where this might show up outside of a reduction in force for age discrimination type claim. Because I promised every single paper ever.
Yes.
So I don't know if that was too much.
Yeah, you gotta shoehorn that in.
Yeah.
I think that it's the most important when there is this lack of independence in the different tests. So we had talked about this, but it was not in the paper, that you could have a claim of racial discrimination where which racial and ethnic group is within the benchmark and which is in the group that's alleging the discrimination sometimes can vary. And obviously that also has some overlap there. I think the age related discrimination was a little cleaner because it's a single number that just tells you what your age is, as opposed to these different groups. But we have seen cases where sometimes the group that was a protected group in one lawsuit is now part of the benchmark group in another. And, there's many different ways of categorizing race and ethnicity. So I think it has some applications there. I think at the end of the paper, we also talk about you could apply this to the stratified Fisher-Exact test or multiple pools test. So not just if there's one pool, but there could be lots of pools. And then it gets even a little bit, probably not worth discussing on the podcast, but there are a lot of different possibilities there that you could.
And that'd be like in a department, multiple departments. Each department would be a pool. Is that what you mean?
Yes, each department would be a pool. You're going to choose 10 people for the RIF from this department and 5 from this one and 20 from the other. And
so all of this could play out pool by pool, and you could have a pool-specific result.
I think you'd have the overall result, not just the pool by pool, but the overall across all the pools aggregate result that you would get the corrected p-values for. But in each of the pools, you're choosing a different age cutoff.
Right. Based on whatever's going on.
Yeah.
In that pool.
Yeah. So the difference will only be when we are doing the simulation, what do we assume the process to be? And based on if it's like a set percentage of people being laid off or like a set probability of a certain selection, those can all be achieved through the simulation. And then the methodology that we propose can be applied to all the specific scenarios that we mentioned, and many more potential applications where the process of a neutral selection and you just want to test a wide range of possible outcomes and see which one was significant, and then you can also use the same adjustment.
Well, I'll probably downgrade then the critical importance of this in every single paper that someone might read, but I do feel comfortable saying this is the singular most important statistical test adjustment I've discussed in the past 30 minutes. So
no doubt. I'm going to go try and use it this afternoon.
Yeah. Take it home with you. Carol, thank you so much for joining us and talking to us about this paper. We hope to see it published, and I want to use this adjustment all the time now.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's been this episode of Significance. This episode's been brought to you by Edgeworth Economics, a leader in economic consulting, and with the help of our producers, Kimberly Krewald, Ryan Deal, and Brian McLamara of Brand Ready Media, with music by Armwell Lang. Thanks for listening, StatPack, and always remember to check your assumptions.